"This is my last chance," Cletus whispered to himself as he tuned his guitar backstage at the Las Vegas International Hotel. Country music was losing ground to rock and pop, and venues were dropping traditional acts like his from their lineups. At 28, he faced an impossible choice: abandon the music that ran through his veins like blood, or watch his dreams die slowly in empty lounges where people treated his art like elevator music. What Cletus didn't know was that Elvis Presley had been listening to his sound checks and was about to offer him something that would change country music forever. But to understand why this moment would transform both Cletus's understanding of his own worth and Elvis's perspective on musical prejudice, you need to know about the journey that brought a talented country musician to the brink of giving up on his dreams. Because this story begins not with failure or lack of talent, but with a society that had decided his genre wasn't sophisticated enough to matter. It was September 12, 1974, at the Las Vegas International Hotel, and 28-year-old Cletus Williams was preparing for what he believed might be his final performance. For the past 6 years, he had been trying to make it as a country musician in an industry that was increasingly dismissive of traditional sounds in favor of the rock and pop music that dominated radio and television. Cletus stood in the small backstage area reserved for lounge performers, adjusting the tuning pegs on his well-worn Gibson acoustic guitar, the same instrument his grandfather had taught him to play on the front porch of their Tennessee farmhouse 20 years earlier. The guitar bore the scars of countless performances, scratches from enthusiastic strumming, worn spots where his fingers had found their familiar positions, and a small crack near the sound hole that somehow made the instrument sound richer rather than damaged. The backstory of Cletus Williams was one of authentic musical heritage that seemed increasingly irrelevant in the changing landscape of American popular music. He had grown up in rural Tennessee, where music wasn't just entertainment but a way of life, a method of storytelling, and a connection to generations of family history. His grandfather, Jeremiah Williams, had been a respected musician in their small community, playing at church gatherings, local celebrations, and informal sessions on neighbors' porches. Jeremiah had learned his music from his own father, creating an unbroken chain of musical tradition that stretched back to the early days of American country music. From the time Cletus could hold a guitar, he had been absorbing not just the technical aspects of playing, but the deeper understanding of how music could capture and convey the experiences of ordinary people facing extraordinary circumstances. The songs he learned weren't just melodies and lyrics. They were stories about love, loss, hard work, family loyalty, and the struggles of rural American life. By the time Cletus was 16, he was already writing his own songs, combining the traditional structures and themes he had inherited with his own observations about modern life. His early compositions showed a sophistication that went far beyond the 3 chords and complaints about trucks stereotype that urban critics often applied to country music. Cletus's songs dealt with complex emotional terrain, the isolation experienced by young people leaving small towns for opportunities in cities, the tension between preserving tradition and embracing change, the dignity of physical labor in a world increasingly focused on intellectual achievement, and the universal themes of love and heartbreak expressed through the specific lens of rural American experience. After high school, Cletus had made the difficult decision to leave Tennessee and pursue his musical career in Nashville, the acknowledged center of country music. But even in Music City, he found himself struggling against changing tastes and industry trends that seemed to be moving away from the authentic sound he represented. The Nashville of the early 1970s was in a state of transition, with producers and record labels increasingly interested in crossover appeal and mainstream commercial success rather than the traditional country sound that had built the industry. Artists were being encouraged to incorporate pop elements, smooth production techniques, and broader themes that would appeal to urban as well as rural audiences. Cletus's authentic style, rooted in traditional country, but elevated by his sophisticated songwriting and complex musical arrangements, seemed to fall between categories in ways that made industry professionals uncomfortable. He was too traditional for the new country direction, but too complex and nuanced for those who dismissed country music as simple-minded entertainment. After 2 frustrating years in Nashville, during which he played in numerous bands, wrote songs for other artists, and struggled to find his own recording opportunities, Cletus made the decision to try his luck in Las Vegas. The reasoning seemed sound. Las Vegas was a place where all kinds of entertainment thrived, where tourists came seeking authentic American experiences, and where a talented performer could potentially find an audience regardless of current industry trends. The reality of Las Vegas had proven more challenging than Cletus anticipated. While the city did offer opportunities for musicians, the venues that were willing to book country acts typically relegated them to lounge performances that functioned more as background music than featured entertainment. Audiences in Las Vegas lounges were often distracted by gambling, conversation, and drinking, treating live music as ambiance rather than art worthy of attention. For the past 3 years, Cletus had been playing regular gigs at various Las Vegas hotels, gradually working his way up from the smallest venues to more prestigious locations. The Las Vegas International Hotel represented the pinnacle of his Vegas career so far, a major venue where established stars performed for audiences who came specifically to see live music rather than simply tolerating it while engaged in other activities. But even this achievement felt hollow to Cletus because he was still playing in the lounge rather than the main showroom, still providing background music rather than headlining entertainment, and still facing audiences who seemed to view country music as a quaint curiosity rather than a serious art form. The challenge wasn't lack of talent or audience appreciation from those who actually listened to his music. The problem was a broader cultural attitude that dismissed country music as unsophisticated, backward-looking, and appealing only to audiences who were seen as less educated or culturally aware than those who preferred rock, pop, or jazz. Music critics regularly described country music in condescending terms, treating it as a lower form of artistic expression that relied on simple musical structures and obvious emotional appeals rather than the complexity and subtlety they found in other genres. This attitude filtered down through the industry, affecting booking decisions, radio programming, and the opportunities available to country artists. Cletus had experienced this prejudice directly in countless ways over his 6-year career. Venue owners would book him for slots when they expected smaller, less sophisticated audiences. Music journalists would review his performances with predetermined assumptions about the limitations of country music, focusing on what they saw as simplicity rather than recognizing the skill and creativity in his work. Other musicians, particularly those working in rock and pop genres, often treated Cletus and other country artists as somehow lesser colleagues, assuming that their musical choices reflected limited ability rather than deliberate artistic direction. The attitude was rarely expressed directly, but it permeated interactions and influenced the professional respect and opportunities that came with recognition as a serious artist. Perhaps most frustratingly for Cletus, the prejudice against country music seemed to prevent people from actually listening to what he was doing. His songs incorporated complex harmonic progressions, sophisticated lyrical imagery, and musical arrangements that drew from multiple genres while maintaining their country foundation. But audiences and critics seemed to hear only what they expected to hear, filtering his actual artistic work through their preconceptions about what country music was supposed to be. This dynamic had worn down Cletus's confidence and motivation over the years, making him question not just his career choices but his artistic vision itself. If the wider musical world couldn't recognize the value and sophistication in what he was creating, perhaps he was deluding himself about the quality of his work. The financial pressures were also mounting. Country music gigs typically paid less than comparable rock or pop performances, and the limited opportunities for advancement meant that Cletus was struggling to make a sustainable living from his music. He had been supplementing his performance income with day jobs, construction work, restaurant shifts, and other employment that allowed him the flexibility to take music gigs when they became available. At 28, Cletus was reaching the age where continuing to chase uncertain musical dreams while living paycheck to paycheck was becoming increasingly difficult to justify. He had friends from high school who had established careers, bought homes, started families, and built stable lives while he was still sleeping in cheap motels between gigs and wondering whether his next performance might be his last. The specific crisis that had brought Cletus to this moment of decision had occurred 3 weeks earlier, during what should have been a breakthrough opportunity. A prominent Las Vegas talent scout had attended one of his lounge performances, ostensibly to evaluate him for potential booking in larger venues or recording opportunities. Cletus had given what he considered one of his best performances, playing a carefully selected set of original songs that showcased both his traditional country roots and his more innovative musical ideas. The songs ranged from intimate ballads about family relationships to more upbeat numbers about resilience and hope, all delivered with the emotional authenticity and technical skill that he had been developing throughout his career. After the performance, the talent scout had approached Cletus with feedback that was both encouraging and devastating. "You're obviously talented," the scout had said, "but country music is a dying genre. Audiences want rock, they want pop, they want something with energy and relevance. This traditional stuff might play well in small towns, but it's not going to succeed in major markets." The scout's suggestion was that Cletus consider transitioning to a rock or pop sound, using his musical skills and performing ability to pursue genres that had better commercial prospects. "With your voice and stage presence, you could probably make the transition," the scout had said. "You just need to be willing to evolve with the times." The conversation had forced Cletus to confront the fundamental question of artistic integrity versus commercial success. He could potentially find greater opportunities by abandoning the musical style that had shaped his identity and expressed his deepest understanding of life and art. But doing so would mean betraying not just his own artistic vision, but the entire tradition of music that had been passed down to him by his family and community. The 3 weeks since that conversation had been a period of intense internal debate and growing despair. Cletus had tried to imagine himself performing rock or pop music, writing songs about urban experiences and contemporary themes that felt foreign to his understanding of the world. The exercise had only reinforced his sense that such a transition would be tantamount to abandoning his authentic self for the sake of external validation and financial reward. At the same time, the practical realities of his situation were becoming impossible to ignore. His savings were nearly exhausted, his credit cards were at their limits, and he was facing the prospect of having to return to Tennessee and find conventional employment if his music career couldn't soon provide adequate income. The performance he was preparing for tonight at the Las Vegas International Hotel represented what Cletus had decided would be his final attempt to find an audience for his authentic musical vision. If this show, at one of the most prestigious venues where he had been able to secure booking, couldn't generate the kind of response that might lead to better opportunities, he would accept that his career as a professional musician was over. The decision had brought both relief and profound sadness. Relief because the constant uncertainty and financial pressure would end, but sadness because it would mean the death of dreams that had sustained him through years of struggle and defined his sense of purpose and identity. As Cletus completed his pre-performance routine of tuning his guitar and reviewing his song list, he was unaware that Elvis Presley was in the building, having arrived early to prepare for his own evening performance in the main showroom. Elvis had a habit of walking through different areas of the hotels where he performed, observing other entertainers, and staying connected to the broader musical community that made venues like the International Hotel cultural centers rather than just entertainment facilities. Elvis had been passing through the area where the lounge performers prepared when he heard the sound of Cletus's guitar being tuned. Something about the quality of the instrument's tone and the precision of the tuning process had caught his attention, suggesting a musician who took their craft seriously and understood the importance of technical excellence in service of artistic expression. Curious about the source of the sound, Elvis had positioned himself where he could observe Cletus's sound check without interrupting the musician's preparation. What he heard during those few minutes would challenge his own assumptions about country music and remind him of the artistic principles that had guided his own career development. Cletus's sound check began with a simple finger-picking pattern that demonstrated both his technical skill and his understanding of how to use space and silence as musical elements. The melody he played was recognizably country in its structure but sophisticated in its harmonic development, moving through chord progressions that suggested jazz influence while maintaining the emotional directness that characterized the best country music. When Cletus began singing along with his guitar playing, Elvis immediately recognized the quality and authenticity of his voice. This wasn't someone imitating country music or performing it as a novelty act. This was an artist who understood the genre from the inside, who could convey its emotional content with the kind of genuine feeling that can't be manufactured or learned from studying recordings. The song Cletus was rehearsing dealt with themes of artistic struggle and the difficulty of maintaining creative integrity in a world that seemed indifferent to authentic expression. The lyrics were poetic without being pretentious, specific without being narrow, and universal without losing their connection to particular experiences and places. Elvis found himself drawn into the performance despite his intention to simply observe and move on. The combination of musical sophistication and emotional honesty reminded him of his own early experiences as an artist trying to find acceptance for a musical vision that didn't fit neatly into existing categories. When Cletus finished his sound check and began preparing for his actual performance, Elvis made a decision that would surprise both of them. Instead of continuing to his own dressing room, he approached Cletus directly, motivated by a combination of professional respect and personal curiosity about the story behind such obvious talent being relegated to lounge performances. "That sounded real good," Elvis said as Cletus looked up from his guitar case with surprise. "I'm Elvis Presley. I heard your sound check and wanted to tell you how much I enjoyed it." Cletus felt a moment of disorientation, as if the stress of his situation had caused him to hallucinate an encounter with one of the most famous musicians in the world. "Mr. Presley, I thank you. That means more than I can say, especially coming from you." Elvis sat down in one of the chairs near Cletus's preparation area, his manner suggesting that this was a conversation between fellow musicians rather than a brief encounter between a star and an aspiring artist. "Tell me about your music. That song you were rehearsing. Did you write that?" The question opened a floodgate of expression that Cletus hadn't realized he needed. For the next 20 minutes, he found himself describing his musical background, his artistic goals, and his current crisis to someone who listened with genuine interest and understanding. Elvis asked thoughtful questions about Cletus's songwriting process, his musical influences, and his experiences trying to find acceptance for his artistic vision. The conversation revealed that Elvis had his own complex relationship with genre boundaries and industry expectations, having successfully crossed musical categories while maintaining his artistic authenticity. "You know what I think your problem is," Elvis said after hearing Cletus's story. "You're trying to fit into boxes that other people made, instead of showing them that the boxes aren't big enough for what you're doing." The observation struck Cletus as both insightful and potentially naive. "But if the industry and the audiences aren't interested in what I'm doing, how can I make a living from it? How can I reach people if nobody wants to listen?" Elvis smiled with the understanding of someone who had faced similar challenges earlier in his own career. "What if I told you that the best way to change people's minds about country music is to show them what it can be when it's done at the highest level? What if instead of trying to become something else, you became the best version of what you already are?" The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Elvis's manager, who reminded him that he needed to prepare for his own performance. But before leaving, Elvis made an offer that would change the trajectory of Cletus's career and his understanding of his own artistic worth. "I want you to think about something," Elvis said. "What would happen if we did a song together? Not you trying to sound like me, and not me trying to sound like you, but both of us doing what we do best and seeing how it fits together." Cletus felt his heart racing at the possibility being suggested. "You mean, perform together? Tonight? Why not?" Elvis replied. "Music is music. Good art is good art. If what you're doing has value, and I believe it does, then it should be able to stand up next to any other kind of music and prove its worth." The remainder of their conversation focused on practical details: which song they might perform together, how to arrange it so that both artists' strengths were highlighted, and how to present it to the audience in a way that would maximize its impact. Elvis suggested that they perform one of Cletus's original songs, but arranged in a way that incorporated elements of rock and roll while maintaining its country foundation. The idea was to demonstrate that genre boundaries were artificial constructions that limited rather than enhanced artistic expression. Cletus's evening performance began as usual, with a sparse audience that seemed more interested in their drinks and conversations than in the music being presented. But word had spread among hotel staff and other performers that something unusual was planned, and the lounge gradually filled with people who had come specifically to see what Elvis Presley and this unknown country musician might create together. When Elvis joined Cletus on stage for the final song of the set, the energy in the room transformed immediately. The audience, which had been treating the performance as background entertainment, suddenly focused their complete attention on what was happening in front of them. The song they performed together was one of Cletus's most personal compositions, dealing with the experience of feeling like an outsider in your own culture, and the challenge of maintaining your authentic voice in a world that seems to value conformity over creativity. Elvis's contribution enhanced rather than overshadowed Cletus's artistry, adding rock and roll energy and vocal power while allowing the country foundation of the song to remain intact. The result was a musical fusion that demonstrated the artificial nature of genre boundaries while showcasing the strengths that each tradition brought to the collaboration. Country music's storytelling and emotional authenticity combined with rock and roll's energy and broad appeal to create something that was greater than the sum of its parts. The audience response was immediate and overwhelming. People who had never paid attention to country music found themselves moved by the power and sophistication of Cletus's songwriting. Rock and roll fans discovered that traditional musical forms could enhance rather than diminish the impact of contemporary performance styles. Most importantly for Cletus, the performance proved that his artistic vision was not only valid but potentially revolutionary. The problem had never been the quality or relevance of his music, but the narrow thinking of an industry that couldn't imagine how different musical traditions might complement each other. After the performance, Elvis and Cletus were approached by several music industry professionals who had been in the audience, including the talent scout who had previously suggested that Cletus abandon country music for more commercial genres. The scout's attitude had changed completely after witnessing the power of the collaboration. "I was wrong about country music," the scout admitted. "I was thinking about it in terms of limitations instead of possibilities. What you two did up there tonight shows that any musical tradition can be part of something bigger without losing what makes it special." The evening led to recording opportunities, concert bookings, and a new understanding within the music industry of how different genres could collaborate and cross-pollinate without sacrificing their individual characteristics. Cletus's career was transformed not because he abandoned his country roots, but because he found a way to demonstrate their value and relevance to broader audiences. Elvis's involvement in the collaboration also marked a new phase in his own artistic development, as he began incorporating more country elements into his performances and recordings. The mutual influence enriched both artists' work and helped bridge divides between musical communities that had sometimes been suspicious of each other. Years later, when music historians examined this period, they identified the Elvis-Cletus collaboration as a pivotal moment in the development of what would later be called Americana music, as a category that recognized the common roots and mutual influences between country, rock, folk, and other distinctly American musical traditions. The success of their partnership proved that artistic authenticity and commercial viability were not mutually exclusive, and that the best way to honor musical traditions was not to preserve them unchanged but to demonstrate their continued relevance and capacity for growth and evolution. For Cletus, the collaboration represented validation not just of his career choices but of his fundamental belief that country music contained sophisticated artistic possibilities that deserved serious consideration and respect. He continued to perform and record country music throughout his career, but always with the understanding that genre boundaries were tools rather than restrictions, and that the highest artistic achievement came from transcending rather than conforming to categorical limitations. The story of that night at the Las Vegas International Hotel became legendary among musicians and music fans, representing the power of artistic courage and the importance of remaining open to unexpected collaborations and influences. It demonstrated that prejudice against any musical form ultimately impoverished the entire musical landscape, and that true artistic progress came from building bridges rather than maintaining walls between different traditions and communities. Elvis and Cletus remained friends and occasional collaborators throughout their careers, always committed to the principle that music's highest purpose was to bring people together across the artificial boundaries that society created to separate and categorize human experience. Their partnership proved that when artists approached their work with genuine respect for different traditions and openness to new possibilities, they could create something that honored the past while pointing toward a more inclusive and creative future. The transformation of Cletus's career from near failure to groundbreaking success illustrated the importance of artistic persistence and the danger of allowing external prejudice to define the value of creative work. His story inspired countless other musicians to maintain confidence in their artistic vision, even when the industry seemed indifferent or hostile to their particular approach to their craft. Most importantly, the collaboration demonstrated that the solution to artistic marginalization was not to abandon distinctive approaches in favor of mainstream acceptance, but to find ways to demonstrate the value and relevance of those approaches to broader audiences. True artistic progress came not from homogenization but from creative synthesis that preserved diversity while building connections across different traditions and communities. The evening that began with Cletus believing he was giving his final performance as a country musician ended with his recognition as an innovative artist who had helped expand the possibilities available to musicians working in all genres. His near decision to abandon music entirely was transformed into a renewed commitment to pushing the boundaries of what country music could be and do in the modern world. Through Elvis's intervention and support, Cletus learned that the problem was never with his music but with a cultural attitude that limited rather than expanded possibilities for artistic expression and audience engagement. The change in his career trajectory represented not just personal success but a broader shift toward more inclusive and creative approaches to musical categorization and appreciation. The evening that began with Cletus believing he was giving his final performance as a country musician ended with his recognition as an innovative artist who had helped expand the possibilities available to musicians working in all genres. His near decision to abandon music entirely was transformed into a renewed commitment to pushing the boundaries of what country music could be and do in the modern world. Through Elvis's intervention and support, Cletus learned that the problem was never with his music, but with a cultural attitude that limited rather than expanded possibilities for artistic expression and audience engagement. The change in his career trajectory represented not just personal success but a broader shift toward more inclusive and creative approaches to musical categorization and appreciation. The legacy of their collaboration continued to influence musicians and music industry professionals for decades, serving as a reminder that the most powerful art often emerges from unexpected combinations and that the preservation of musical traditions requires their continued evolution and adaptation to new circumstances and opportunities. The recording that emerged from their collaboration became one of the most significant country rock fusion pieces of the 1970s, influencing a generation of musicians who would later create what became known as the outlaw country movement. Artists like Willie Nelson, Waylon Jennings, and Chris Christopherson cited the Elvis Cletus recording as proof that country music could maintain its authenticity while reaching broader audiences. The immediate impact on Cletus's career was transformative in ways that extended far beyond commercial success. Record labels that had previously dismissed his work as too country suddenly recognized the potential for country rock crossover artists. Booking agents who had relegated him to lounge performances began offering him opening slots for major rock acts, and music journalists who had ignored country music began writing serious reviews of his performances. More importantly, the collaboration gave Cletus a new understanding of his role as an artist and cultural ambassador. He realized that his responsibility wasn't just to preserve traditional country music unchanged, but to demonstrate its continued relevance and power by showing how it could engage with contemporary musical forms while maintaining its essential character. The months following the collaboration were filled with opportunities that had seemed impossible just weeks earlier. Major recording studios wanted to work with him, established musicians sought him out for collaborations, and music festivals that had never featured country acts began booking him as a way to diversify their lineups and reach new audiences. But perhaps the most meaningful change was in Cletus's relationship with other country musicians. Instead of seeing him as someone who had abandoned traditional country music by collaborating with Elvis, they recognized him as someone who had found a way to bring respect and attention to the genre. He became a bridge between the traditional country community and the broader music world. The success also attracted attention from music educators and cultural historians who recognized the collaboration as a significant moment in American musical development. Universities began inviting Cletus to speak about the fusion of different musical traditions, and his performances were analyzed in academic papers about the evolution of popular music. Cletus's story became a case study in how artistic integrity and commercial success could coexist when artists were willing to take creative risks and challenge conventional industry thinking. Business schools used his career transformation as an example of how individual innovation could disrupt established market categories and create new opportunities. The collaboration with Elvis also led to unexpected friendships and mentorships within the music industry. Established artists who had admired Cletus's work from a distance began reaching out to collaborate, and younger musicians started seeking his guidance about maintaining artistic authenticity while navigating commercial pressures. One of the most significant ongoing relationships was with Bob Dylan, who had been in the audience for the original Elvis Cletus performance and was deeply impressed by their ability to blend different musical traditions without compromising either artist's distinctive style. Dylan later invited Cletus to contribute to several of his albums, appreciating his ability to bring country authenticity to songs that spanned multiple genres. The partnership with Dylan introduced Cletus to the folk music community, leading to collaborations with artists like Joan Baez, Joni Mitchell, and Neil Young. These relationships demonstrated that the musical bridges he had begun building with Elvis could extend across multiple genres and artistic communities. Country music itself began to evolve in response to the attention and respect that Cletus's work had generated. Artists who had been pressured to abandon traditional sounds in favor of mainstream appeal found new confidence in exploring the sophisticated possibilities within country music traditions. Record labels began signing country artists who emphasized songwriting complexity and musical sophistication rather than just commercial appeal. Radio stations started programming country music during prime listening hours rather than relegating it to specialty shows, and music critics began reviewing country albums with the same seriousness they applied to rock and pop releases. The annual Country Music Awards ceremony, which had previously struggled for mainstream media attention, began attracting coverage from major television networks and entertainment magazines. The award show started featuring collaborations between country artists and musicians from other genres, following the model that Elvis and Cletus had established. Cletus's influence extended beyond musical performance to songwriting and production techniques. His approach to combining traditional country storytelling with sophisticated harmonic progressions influenced a generation of country songwriters who began exploring more complex lyrical and musical territory. Music producers began seeking out country artists who could bring the authenticity and emotional depth of traditional country music to contemporary recording techniques. The Nashville sound that emerged in the late 1970s incorporated many of the elements that Cletus had pioneered in his collaboration with Elvis. The transformation of Cletus's career also had personal implications that extended beyond his professional success. The financial security that came with his newfound recognition allowed him to purchase a home, start a family, and build the kind of stable life that had seemed impossible during his years of struggling for acceptance. He married Sarah Mitchell, a music journalist who had written extensively about the country rock fusion movement and understood both the artistic and commercial challenges that musicians faced when working across genre boundaries. Their partnership represented both personal happiness and professional collaboration, as Sarah became an important advisor and advocate for Cletus's career. Their children grew up in a household where different musical traditions were valued and explored, and both became accomplished musicians themselves. Their daughter Emma specialized in classical violin but incorporated country and rock influences into her compositions, while their son Jake became a successful producer working with artists across multiple genres. The family's approach to music education reflected Cletus's belief that artistic excellence came from understanding and respecting different traditions rather than limiting oneself to a single genre or style. They hosted informal musical gatherings where traditional country musicians, rock artists, classical performers, and folk singers would share songs and techniques. These gatherings became legendary in the Nashville music community, representing the kind of cross-genre collaboration and mutual respect that Cletus's career had helped establish as standard practice within the industry. Young musicians sought invitations to these sessions as opportunities to learn from established artists and explore new creative possibilities. Cletus's commitment to education and mentorship led to his establishment of the Country Music Heritage Foundation, which provided scholarships for young musicians studying traditional country music while encouraging them to explore contemporary applications and innovations. The foundation's programs brought together master musicians from different generations and regions, ensuring that traditional techniques and repertoires were preserved while being adapted to contemporary musical contexts. Students learned not just how to play traditional country music, but how to use it as a foundation for original creative work. The foundation's annual festival became one of the most important events in American music, featuring performances that demonstrated the connections between country music and other American musical traditions, including blues, folk, gospel, and rock and roll. International musicians began attending the festival as well, drawn by opportunities to learn about American musical traditions and to explore how their own cultural musical heritage might connect with country music approaches to storytelling and emotional expression. Cletus's influence on the international music scene grew as his recordings were distributed worldwide and foreign musicians began incorporating country music elements into their own work. He toured extensively in Europe, Asia, and Australia, always emphasizing the universal themes and emotions that country music addressed despite its specific American cultural origins. These international experiences enriched Cletus's own musical development, as he learned how musicians from different cultural backgrounds approached similar themes of love, loss, work, family, and community. He began incorporating subtle influences from Celtic, African, and Asian musical traditions into his compositions while maintaining his country music foundation. The cross-cultural musical explorations led to some of his most innovative and critically acclaimed work, demonstrating that American country music could serve as a universal language for expressing human experiences that transcended national and cultural boundaries. As Cletus approached middle age, his role in the music industry evolved from performing artist to elder statesman and cultural ambassador. He continued to perform and record regularly, but increasingly focused on mentoring younger musicians and advocating for policies that supported artistic development and cultural preservation. His advocacy work led to increased government funding for music education programs, better copyright protections for songwriters and performers, and initiatives that helped small venues survive in an increasingly corporate entertainment landscape. The legacy of that pivotal night at the Las Vegas International Hotel continued to resonate through Cletus's later career and influence on the broader music industry. What had begun as a desperate attempt to save a failing career had evolved into a lifelong mission to demonstrate the value and relevance of traditional American music while encouraging its continued evolution and adaptation. The story became required reading in music industry courses as an example of how individual artistic courage could create broader cultural change, and how the preservation of musical traditions required their continued development rather than their rigid preservation. Cletus often reflected on the importance of Elvis's intervention in changing not just his career but his understanding of his responsibilities as an artist. The collaboration had taught him that true artistic success meant not just personal achievement but contribution to the broader cultural conversation about creativity, tradition, and innovation. When Cletus was inducted into the Country Music Hall of Fame, his acceptance speech focused on the lesson that musical categories were tools for understanding rather than barriers for separation, and that the highest artistic achievements came from building bridges between different traditions and communities rather than defending territorial boundaries. The final verse of the song that he and Elvis had performed together, that transformative night, became the motto for his foundation and his approach to mentoring young musicians. The music that moves us all comes from the same deep well, and the songs that last forever are the ones that help us remember what connects us rather than what divides us. Today, more than 4 decades after that crucial performance, Cletus Williams is remembered not just as a successful country musician but as an artist who helped transform how American music understood itself and its possibilities for growth and evolution. His story serves as inspiration for any artist struggling to maintain authenticity while seeking broader acceptance and recognition. The collaboration with Elvis demonstrated that the solution to artistic marginalization was not conformity to mainstream expectations but the creative demonstration of how distinctive artistic traditions could enhance and be enhanced by engagement with broader cultural conversations. Their partnership proved that the most powerful art emerges when artists are willing to risk failure in service of authentic expression, and when they approach collaboration with respect for different traditions rather than attempts to diminish or dominate them. The continuing influence of their work reminds us that cultural progress requires both the preservation of valuable traditions and the courage to explore how those traditions might contribute to new forms of creative expression that honor the past while speaking to contemporary experiences and concerns. The annual Cletus Williams Country Heritage Festival, now in its 30th year, continues to attract musicians and audiences from around the world who come to celebrate the fusion of traditional and contemporary musical forms. The festival has become a pilgrimage site for artists seeking to understand how authentic cultural expression can transcend genre boundaries while maintaining its essential character and emotional power. Music historians studying the transformation of American popular music in the late 20th century consistently identify the Elvis-Cletus collaboration as a watershed moment that demonstrated the artificial nature of musical categories and opened new possibilities for creative expression that honored multiple traditions simultaneously. The partnership's influence can be heard in the work of countless contemporary artists who blend country, rock, folk, and other genres without apologizing for their eclectic approaches or feeling pressured to conform to industry expectations about musical purity or commercial categorization. Young musicians today grow up in a musical landscape that Cletus and Elvis helped create, one where artistic authenticity is measured not by adherence to rigid genre conventions but by the sincerity and skill with which artists express their unique creative vision while remaining open to influence and collaboration across traditional boundaries. The story of Cletus Williams serves as a timeless reminder that artistic courage, persistence, and willingness to take creative risks can not only save individual careers but transform entire cultural conversations about the value and possibilities inherent in all forms of human creative expression. His journey from near defeat to transformative success proves that authentic artistry, when supported by vision and courage, can overcome prejudice and create lasting change. The documentary about the Elvis-Cletus collaboration, produced 20 years after their historic performance, featured interviews with dozens of musicians who cited that night as inspiration for their own cross-genre experiments. The film won multiple awards and was screened at music festivals worldwide, cementing the collaboration's place in music history. Willie Nelson spoke movingly in the documentary about how the Elvis-Cletus performance had given him courage to explore his own artistic boundaries. Seeing Elvis embrace country music that way, and seeing Cletus hold his own with the king of rock and roll, that told me there wasn't any music that was off limits if you approached it with respect and authenticity. Waylon Jennings echoed those sentiments, explaining how the collaboration had influenced his decision to record with rock musicians and incorporate electric instruments into his country sound. Cletus showed us that country music wasn't something we needed to apologize for or water down. It was something powerful that could make any other music better. The Americana Music Association established the annual Cletus Williams Innovation Award to recognize artists who successfully blend traditional and contemporary musical forms while maintaining artistic integrity. Recipients have included artists from multiple genres who have followed the model of respectful cross-pollination that Cletus and Elvis pioneered. Music education programs began incorporating the Elvis-Cletus story into curricula about American musical history, using their collaboration as an example of how cultural barriers could be overcome through artistic excellence and mutual respect. Students learned about the social and economic factors that had created artificial divisions between musical genres. The collaboration's influence extended beyond music into broader conversations about cultural prejudice and artistic hierarchy. Sociologists used the story to illustrate how elite attitudes toward low culture often prevented recognition of sophisticated artistic achievement in non-prestigious forms. Academic conferences on American studies regularly featured presentations analyzing the collaboration's significance as a moment when class-based cultural assumptions were challenged through artistic demonstration rather than political argumentation. The performance became a case study in cultural diplomacy and bridge building. Cletus's hometown in Tennessee erected a statue commemorating his achievement, not just as a successful musician, but as someone who had brought honor and recognition to rural American culture. The statue became a destination for music pilgrims and a symbol of the artistic potential that exists in communities often overlooked by mainstream cultural institutions. The Cletus Williams Music Center, built with proceeds from his successful recording career, provides state-of-the-art facilities for young musicians in rural areas who might not otherwise have access to professional quality equipment and instruction. The center offers scholarships, mentorship programs, and performance opportunities. Nashville's Country Music Hall of Fame created a permanent exhibit about the collaboration, featuring the original guitars used in the performance, costumes, photographs, and audio recordings. The exhibit draws visitors from around the world who come to understand how two artists changed the course of American music history. The exhibit includes interactive elements that allow visitors to experience the musical fusion firsthand, playing along with recordings of the original performance and learning about the technical and artistic elements that made the collaboration so revolutionary. Recording studios began marketing themselves as places where artists could explore cross-genre possibilities, explicitly referencing the Elvis Cletus model as proof that artistic risk-taking could lead to commercial as well as critical success. The collaboration had demonstrated that audiences were hungry for authentic artistic innovation. Radio programmers created new format categories that reflected the blurred boundaries between country, rock, folk, and pop music. The Americana format that emerged in the 1980s and 1990s directly traced its roots to the acceptance that the Elvis Cletus collaboration had created for genre-blending music. International music festivals began featuring American artists who worked in the fusion tradition that Cletus and Elvis had pioneered. European audiences, in particular, responded enthusiastically to music that combined the storytelling traditions of country music with the energy and production values of rock and roll. The collaboration influenced fashion as well as music, as artists began adopting visual presentations that mixed elements from different musical traditions. Country artists began incorporating rock stage theatrics, while rock musicians adopted some of the more casual, authentic presentation styles associated with country music. Music journalism evolved to accommodate artists who didn't fit neatly into established categories, with critics developing new vocabulary and analytical frameworks for discussing genre-blending music. The old dismissive attitudes toward country music gave way to more sophisticated understanding of its artistic possibilities. The business model of the music industry gradually adapted to support artists who worked across genre boundaries, with marketing strategies that emphasized artistic innovation rather than categorical conformity. Record labels began seeking out artists who could appeal to multiple demographic groups. Cletus's publishing company became one of the most successful in Nashville, representing songwriters who worked in the fusion tradition and helping them navigate the complex licensing and royalty structures that governed cross-genre collaborations. The annual Elvis Week celebration in Memphis began including tributes to the collaboration, recognizing it as one of Elvis's most significant contributions to American musical development. Cletus became a regular participant in these events, often performing the song that had launched their partnership. Music therapy programs began using the story of the collaboration to help clients overcome their own prejudices and limitations. The narrative of two artists finding common ground despite different backgrounds resonated with people working through various forms of personal and interpersonal conflict. The collaboration's influence on music production techniques was profound, as engineers learned to balance the acoustic intimacy of traditional country music with the electric power of rock instrumentation. New recording methods emerged that could capture the best qualities of both musical approaches. Guitar manufacturers began producing instruments designed specifically for cross-genre playing, combining the tonal characteristics needed for country music with the durability and electrical capabilities required for rock performance. These instruments became standard equipment for Americana musicians. Music venues redesigned their spaces to accommodate performances that might range from intimate acoustic sets to full-band electric performances, recognizing that modern audiences wanted flexibility and variety rather than rigid adherence to single-genre expectations. The collaboration inspired television programming that featured cross-genre performances and collaborations, leading to the development of music shows that became platforms for artistic experimentation and cultural bridge building. Cletus established a scholarship program for young musicians from rural backgrounds who wanted to pursue careers in music, recognizing that his own success had been made possible by the opportunities that came from the Elvis collaboration. The program has helped launch hundreds of successful musical careers. The Elvis Presley estate continued to support cross-genre collaboration by licensing Elvis's music for projects that honored his spirit of musical exploration and cultural bridge building. These collaborations kept Elvis's innovative legacy alive while supporting contemporary artists. Music museums around the world began collecting artifacts from the collaboration and similar cross-genre partnerships, recognizing their historical significance in the evolution of popular music and American culture. The story became required reading in conflict resolution courses as an example of how prejudice and misunderstanding could be overcome through authentic engagement and mutual respect rather than confrontation or argument. Contemporary artists continue to cite the Elvis-Cletus collaboration as inspiration for their own willingness to take creative risks and challenge industry expectations about musical categories and artistic limitations. The annual tribute concerts featuring the original song have raised millions of dollars for music education programs, ensuring that future generations of musicians have access to the resources and opportunities needed to develop their own innovative approaches to musical expression.